Working harder, cold open, no warm up. There is a nurse in Ohio working 12-hour shifts 3 days a week. She takes on extra shifts when she can. She has not had a vacation in 4 years. She is exhausted, she is professional, she's genuinely good at her job, and she will retire with somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 saved if everything goes according to plan. There is a guy in Austin who made a template for a legal document, put it on a website, and now sells it for $47. He works maybe 6 hours a week maintaining it. He cleared $180,000 last year. He golfs on Tuesdays. Neither of those is a personal attack. Neither of those is an argument about who deserves what. It is just a description of how the machine works. One person is working inside the machine. The other person built a small machine next to the machine. The output is completely different. The effort is not even close. And here is the thing, most people look at this and think the problem is the nurse's attitude, or her mindset, or that she needs to want it more. That is not the problem. The problem is the gear she is in. She's pedaling at maximum effort in the wrong gear, on a hill designed to never flatten out. Meanwhile, the guy in Austin found a different gear entirely, and the hill does not really exist for him anymore. That is what this video is about. Not hustle, not motivation, not the top 10 habits of successful people. We're going to explain how the effort to output system actually works and why it is getting increasingly strange the further into 2026 we get. We are going to look at the actual mechanics behind why effort by itself is almost always the last variable that matters. And we are going to do it with math, not feelings, because the math is where it gets uncomfortable. I am Creeper Finance. Let's get into it. We're going to explain how the reward for effort system works and why it's getting weird. Specifically, we're going to cover 4 things that almost no one explains correctly. First, why the connection between effort and income was always weaker than advertised. Second, why leverage is the actual variable and why most people never access it. Third, why time is doing something to your money right now whether you like it or not, and how working more hours actively slows that down. And fourth, the part that will probably annoy you, why the system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. And once you understand the design, you can stop fighting the architecture and start building around it. The metaphor I'm going to use the whole way through this is gear ratios, specifically a bicycle with multiple gears. You are always pedaling, you always have to put in some effort, but the gear you are in determines whether that effort climbs a mountain or spins out in place. Most financial advice you have ever received was about pedaling harder. This video is about gears. Here is the first thing. The effort-income link was always a partial truth. When you were a kid, the model was simple. You study hard, you get good grades, you get a good job, the job pays you more as you get better at it, and eventually you retire. This is not a conspiracy theory. It was a reasonable description of how things worked in, let's say, 1975. You work more, you earn more, you get promoted, the pay goes up. Effort and income moved in roughly the same direction. But here is what that model was actually describing. It was describing a world where labor was scarce and time was the primary bottleneck. If you needed something built, you needed someone's time. If you wanted to sell something, you needed someone's time to sell it. Time was the input that mattered, so trading more time for more money made sense. The whole system was organized around that exchange. That world did not disappear overnight, but it started bending around the time software got cheap, the internet got fast, and the cost of copying information dropped to essentially zero. Let me give you a number. In 2005, starting a business that could reach 1 million customers cost somewhere in the range of $5 million. You needed servers, infrastructure, a distribution chain, a marketing team. That was the entry price. By 2015, you could reach the same audience for maybe $15,000 if you knew what you were doing. By 2025, you can do it for a few $100s and a decent Wi-Fi connection. What that means is that the relationship between effort and scale completely broke. You can now work 30 hours and reach more people than a company that employed 500 people in 1995. The constraint is no longer how many hours you work. The constraint is whether you found the right gear. And this is where it starts getting strange, because the education system, the parenting advice, the corporate career track, all of it was built on the old model, the one where hours equaled output. So you have an entire population that was systematically trained to optimize for the wrong variable, entering an economy that stopped caring about that variable around 15 years ago. You are not pedaling inefficiently because you are lazy or stupid. You are pedaling inefficiently because someone handed you a gear chart from a completely different bicycle. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about skilled labor? Doctors, lawyers, engineers, these people work hard and they earn a lot, yes. They do, and they earn a lot because the skill is rare and the barrier to entry is high. But notice something, a doctor's income is still capped. Not by effort, but by hours. There are only so many patients a doctor can see in a day. The income ceiling is built into the model. You can work harder within that model, but you cannot escape the ceiling by working harder within the model. The ceiling is structural. The highest paid doctors in the United States, the ones who break into the top 1% of earners, almost universally have a second stream. They own the practice, which means other doctors' time is producing income on their behalf, or they have invested their high income into assets, or they consult for pharmaceutical companies. The extra income does not come from seeing more patients. It comes from shifting gears. Effort is still required. I want to be very clear about that because this is where people mishear the argument. I am not saying do not work. I am saying that effort without the right gear is close to worthless as a wealth building strategy. You can be incredibly hardworking and financially stuck at the same time. These things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, if you look around at the people you know, you will probably find that they are not mutually exclusive at all. The people who are grinding the hardest are often not the ones making the most money. They are often the ones making the least. That is not because hard work is punished. It is because hard work in the wrong gear looks exactly the same from the outside as hard work in the right gear. It just produces a completely different result. The second thing, leverage is the gear, and most people never touch it. Let me define leverage the way I actually think about it, not the textbook definition. Leverage is anything that lets your effort multiply past your own time. That is it. That is the whole thing. There are 3 types of leverage that actually matter in 2026. Financial leverage, which is borrowed capital working on your behalf. Human leverage, which is other people's time working on your behalf. And what I call mechanical leverage, which is systems, code, or content working on your behalf while you are doing something else. Most people in their 20s and early 30s have access to exactly 0 of these. Not because they are impossible to access, because nobody explains that they exist, and because accessing them requires accepting a level of risk or asymmetry that the traditional model explicitly trained you to avoid. Let me walk through each one. Financial leverage is the simplest and the most misunderstood. You borrow money, you put that money into something that generates a return higher than the cost of borrowing. The difference goes in your pocket. The classic example is real estate. You put 20% down on a property worth $300,000. You put in $60,000. The property goes up 8% in a year. That is $24,000 in value. On $60,000 invested, that is a 40% return. You did not earn 40% because you worked harder. You earned 40% because the bank put in the other $240,000 and the full property appreciated. Now, people immediately object to this because what if the property goes down? Valid concern. Leverage works in both directions. If the property drops 8% of your equity, that is real. That is why financial leverage requires you to understand what you are doing. But the point is not that leverage is risk-free. The point is that leverage is the mechanism. Without it, your $60,000 earns 8%, which is $4,800. With it, you made $24,000. Same effort, very different gear. Human leverage is how every business above a certain size actually operates. You are not working more hours. You are getting paid for hours that other people work. An agency owner with 8 employees is not working 8 times harder than a freelancer. They are working differently. The structure is different. The gear is different. And mechanical leverage is the one that the internet turned into something almost absurd. You build a thing once, a video, a piece of software, a course, a spreadsheet, a newsletter, and it keeps generating value without you doing anything. The template guy in Austin I mentioned at the beginning, that is mechanical leverage. He did the work once. The system runs while he golfs. Here is what is important to understand about all 3 of these. They require upfront investment of time, of money, of risk, of discomfort. This is why most people never access them, because the traditional model told you to avoid risk, avoid debt, avoid uncertainty, get a stable job, get a pension, stay safe, And all of that advice made complete sense in a world where stability was accessible and the treadmill was moving forward. But the treadmill slowed down. And now the people who followed the safe advice are discovering that safety was never the guarantee they were sold. Let me give you another number that I think about a lot. The median net worth of someone in the United States between the ages of 35 and 44 is around $90,000. $90,000. That is after a decade and a half of working, of paying taxes, of trying to save. The median person in peak earning years has less than $100,000 in net worth. The top 10% have north of $1,200,000. That gap did not happen because the top 10% worked 12 times harder. It happened because the top 10% at some point shifted gears. Now you are probably thinking, okay, but those people had advantages. They had capital or connections or timing. And yes, some of that is true. I am not going to pretend the playing field is flat because it is not. But here is the thing. The gap between people who access any leverage and people who access zero leverage is enormous. You do not have to be in the top 10% of leverage users. You just have to stop being in the zero category. One piece of mechanical leverage, even small, changes the math significantly. A side income stream that generates $500 per month is not just $500 per month. That is $6,000 per year that you can redirect into financial leverage, which compounds, which eventually produces human leverage, and suddenly you are operating on a completely different system than you were 5 years ago. The gear changes, but you have to start. And starting means accepting that the first version of whatever you build will probably be bad. That is the actual barrier. Not skill, not money. The psychological cost of doing something imperfect in a world that trained you to perform well on graded tests. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe. I put out videos specifically about the mechanics of how money moves. Not hype, not inspiration, just the systems. It genuinely helps to have a running thread on this stuff, rather than rediscovering it in pieces. Third thing. Time is already working on your money. The question is which direction. This is the one that people understand in theory and almost completely ignore in practice. Compound growth is not a nice feature. It is the entire game. Everything else is noise. Let me be very concrete about this because the abstract version of this conversation is useless. If you are 22 years old and you invest $300 per month into a boring index fund that returns an average of 9% per year, which is approximately the historical average of the S&P 500, inflation adjusted is lower, but let's use the nominal number. By age 65, you have approximately $1,400,000. You contributed somewhere around $150,000 of your own money. The other $1,250,000 came from compound growth. You did not work for that money. Time did. Now here is the thing about working harder. If you are working 60 or 70 hours a week, a few things happen. First, you are probably trading time for a wage, which means you are in the treadmill gear. Second, you are too exhausted to think clearly about the second or third thing you could be building. Third, and this is the one people miss, when you are that busy, you are much less likely to actually invest consistently. You think about it, you tell yourself you'll set it up next month, and the months pass. The psychological research on this is pretty consistent. High stress, high hours workers save less as a percentage of income than moderate hours workers who earn less. Not because they have less money. They often have more. But because the cognitive load of working that hard leaves very little bandwidth for financial planning, and because the emotional release of high stress often involves spending. You work hard, you feel you deserve a reward, you spend it, you feel better, you go back to work. The cycle is self-reinforcing. The treadmill keeps moving, and while you are on it, time is ticking. And time, once spent, is the one input that cannot be recovered. There is a number that I find genuinely disturbing when I think about it too long. If you wait from age 22 to age 32 to start investing, just 10 years, and then invest the same $300 per month for the same period at the same rate, you end up with around $800,000 at 65. $600,000 less. From a 10-year delay, you did not make a catastrophic mistake. You did not lose money in a bad investment. You just waited. And waiting cost you $600,000. This is why the advice to get your finances in order later, focus on your career now, is in terms of actual dollar outcomes, one of the most expensive pieces of advice a person can receive. The person who told you that probably meant well. They were not wrong that careers matter, but they did not do the math. Or they did the math and it didn't feel real. Now tie this back to the gear ratio. If you are grinding 60 hours a week and you are not investing the difference, you are not only in the wrong gear, you are actively losing ground relative to someone who earns less, works less, and invests consistently. The effort is negative value in that scenario, worse than zero, because it is creating the illusion of progress while the real lever, time in the market, is sitting idle. The treadmill does not compound. Invested capital does. Brief interruption from reality. There is a guy somewhere right now who read a book called something like The 4-Hour Workweek in 2014, quit his job, tried to build a passive income business, and then worked 120 hours a week for 3 years while making $17 per month. He is now back at a regular job. He is also somehow correct that passive income works. Both things are true simultaneously. Passive income exists. Most people who try to build it will have a bad time initially. The point is that the gear is real. The path to the gear is where most people fall apart. Fourth thing, and this is the one that tends to make people uncomfortable. The system is not broken, it is working correctly, and it is specifically designed to do what it is doing. I want to be very careful here because this is not a conspiracy argument. I am not saying there is a group of people in a room somewhere deciding to keep you poor. That is not how systems work. Systems do not need a designer to be consistent. They just need rules that repeat long enough to become structural. Here is what I mean. The current tax code in the United States, which is as of 2026 still largely structured around the 2017 framework, treats different types of income completely differently. The money you earn by going to work and getting a salary is taxed at the highest rate. Federal income tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare. Depending on where you live and what you make, you might lose 30 to 40% of your paycheck before it even hits your account. The money you earn by holding an asset that goes up in value, a stock, a piece of real estate, a business, is taxed at the long-term capital gains rate, which maxes out at 20% for most people and is zero for lower income brackets. Zero. The money you borrow against an asset you own is not taxed at all because it is not income. It is debt. This is how people with enormous net worth manage to live well while reporting very low taxable income. They borrow against assets, the assets keep appreciating, the loan gets paid off with future appreciation or inheritance. The government gets less than they would from a salaried worker. I am not saying this is morally correct. I am saying it is the actual rule set, and the rule set rewards capital over labor. It always has. This is not a recent development. This is built into the architecture. Now, when you know the rule set, you can start making decisions accordingly. This is not about hating the system or loving it. It is about reading the instruction manual before you play the game. Most people never read the instruction manual. They just play and wonder why the outcomes feel arbitrary. Let me give you a concrete illustration. Two people both earn $100,000 per year. Person A earns it entirely as a salary. After taxes, they take home maybe $67,000 depending on the state. They spend $60,000. They save $7,000. Person B earns $40,000 in salary and $60,000 in long-term capital gains from a small portfolio they have been building for a few years. Their effective tax rate on the total is dramatically lower. They might take home $85,000 on the same nominal $100,000. They spend $60,000, they save $25,000. Same income. Very different outcome. And the difference is entirely structural. Person B is not smarter or more disciplined. They just accessed a different gear in the tax structure, which is accessible to anyone who takes the time to understand it. And here is the uncomfortable extension of this. Every hour you spend working harder on a salary, you are producing income in the highest taxed category. Every hour you spend building an asset, a business, a portfolio, a piece of content that earns passively, you are moving toward the lower taxed categories. Effort in Category 1 produces taxable labor income. Effort in Category 2 produces capital income that the system specifically rewards. Working harder in the traditional sense optimizes for the most expensive type of income the system offers. Let me run a mini case study to make this real. This is a fictionalized scenario, but it is built from patterns I have observed and numbers that are realistic. Two guys, both 24 years old, both starting with almost nothing. Call them Marcus and David. Marcus is the one everyone in his family calls the hard worker. He works 60-hour weeks at a logistics company. He earns $62,000 per year. He gets raises. By 30, he is at 80,000. By 35, he is at 95,000. He is genuinely good at his job. His employer likes him. He gets promoted twice. He saves about $8,000 per year, which he keeps in a savings account because the stock market feels risky and he never really looked into it. David works 40 hours a week at a similar company. He earns $55,000 per year. But David has one additional thing. He runs a small website about a hobby. Let's say mechanical keyboards. He started it at 24. For the first 2 years, it made almost nothing. He made $300 in year 1. He made $2,000 in year 2. By year 3, with affiliate links, a small audience, and one simple digital product, he made $14,000 from it. By year 5, the site makes around $30,000 per year with maybe 4 or 5 hours of maintenance per week. At 30, Marcus has saved around $50,000 in cash, earning almost nothing. David has saved roughly the same amount from his salary, but he has also taken the site income and invested it consistently for 6 years. That is somewhere around $120,000 invested. With compound growth on top of it, he is looking at probably $160,000 in actual assets. At 35, Marcus is at $95,000 salary, still strong, still respected, net worth around $120,000. The site David built is now either acquired by a media company for around $400,000, which is a realistic multiple for a profitable content site, or it continues generating income that he has been investing for 11 years. Even without the acquisition, David's net worth is approaching $500,000. He earns less in base salary. He has worked objectively fewer hours. He found a gear Marcus never looked for. The thing I want you to notice is that David did not get lucky. He did not have unique talent. He did something moderately difficult for 2 years with low initial rewards, and the system rewarded the structure of what he built, not the hours he put in. The early hours were real. The ongoing maintenance hours are minimal. The asset compounds. Marcus, meanwhile, did everything right according to the model he was given. He worked hard, he got promoted, he saved what he could. And the model produced an outcome for him. Just a much smaller one than the alternative. Here is the second brief interruption. Somewhere in the comments of a video like this, someone will type, "But not everyone can just make a website," in a tone of deep moral authority. And they are technically correct. Not everyone can build a content website. Some people will try it and fail. Others will find a different form of leverage. A small service business, a rental property, a skill that scales. The specific vehicle is not the point. The gear is the point. The comment is really saying, I don't want to try something that might not work, which is a completely understandable feeling. It is also the exact thing that keeps the gap wide. Now, let me bring all of this together and get to the part that I think most people underestimate, which is the psychological side of the gear shift. Because knowing all of this is not the hard part. Understanding that leverage matters, that taxes reward capital over labor, that time in the market beats time in the office. This stuff is not secret. You can find it in books that have been around for decades. The behavioral economics research on this is extensive, and yet the behavior does not change. Why? There are 3 psychological traps that keep people locked in the effort loop, and I think they are worth naming specifically. Trap 1, effort feels like virtue. This is cultural and it is deep. We are trained from childhood to equate hard work with moral goodness. Laziness is a sin in basically every major religious and cultural tradition. Working hard is not just an economic strategy, it is an identity. So when someone suggests that working less might produce more, the immediate reaction is not economic analysis. It is moral rejection. That sounds like cheating. That feels wrong. And that emotional response short-circuits the logical evaluation before it can even begin. The irony is that building leverage requires enormous effort up front. It is not easy, but because it does not look like traditional hard work, it looks like thinking, experimenting, building systems, it does not trigger the same sense of virtue. People feel guilty taking 2 hours to set up an automated investment account because they are not doing anything. But those 2 hours might produce more long-term wealth than 2 months of overtime. Trap 2, the feedback loop is slow and invisible. When you work an extra shift, you get a paycheck. The feedback is fast, you can see it, you can feel it. When you invest or build a system, the feedback is slow, sometimes years slow. Human brains are not wired for slow feedback loops. We are wired for immediate reward signals. The treadmill keeps paying you every 2 weeks, which feels like progress, because the paycheck arrives and it is real. The compound interest does not feel real because you cannot see it happening. Even though the math says it is far more powerful, the experience of it is invisible until it is suddenly not. This is also why people abandon long-term systems. Not because the system is not working, because the feedback is not happening on a timeline that feels rewarding to the brain. The person who quits the content site after 8 months of low revenue was not wrong that it was hard. They just quit before the feedback loop kicked in. Trap 3. Social comparison runs on visible signals. We judge effort by visible output. The person who stays late at the office is seen as dedicated. The person who leaves at 5 to go work on their own project is seen as not committed enough. The person sleeping in on a Tuesday because they run something that earns while they sleep looks, from the outside, like someone who has not figured their life out yet. Social validation runs on the wrong signals. And because we are social animals, we optimize for the signals that get us approval, not the signals that actually move the financial needle. The practical version of this trap is you will get more compliments for working overtime than for quietly building a side system that earns passively. The overtime is visible. The system building is not. And if you care more about how your effort looks than what it produces, you will keep optimizing for looking busy. The gear shift, psychologically, requires you to stop caring about the appearance of effort and start caring exclusively about the output. That is not easy. It requires a kind of internal clarity about what you are actually trying to do and why. But it is the switch. Everything else is secondary. Let me bring it back to where we started. The nurse in Ohio and the guy in Austin are not two different types of people. They are two people operating in two different gears. The nurse is working hard in a gear that the system has specifically structured to cap. Her income is taxed heavily, her hours are fixed, her ability to scale is zero. Her labor is valuable, important, and also economically trapped by the structure of the system she operates within. The guy in Austin built something that earns independently of his hours, taxed more lightly, scalable without proportional effort, and sellable as an asset if he wants liquidity. He did not do this because he is smarter or more deserving. He did this because at some point he understood the gear system and decided to access a different one. The question is never, should I work hard? The question is always, which gear am I in, and is this the gear that produces the output I want? If the answer is no, working harder in the current gear will not fix it. It will just mean you are spinning faster in the wrong ratio. 3 practical things, none of which are generic. 1. Audit your income sources and categorize them by taxability and scalability. Not to feel bad about them, but to understand what gear they represent. Salary income is high tax, low scale. Capital income is low tax, high scale. Passive business income is somewhere in between, depending on structure. Once you can see the map, you can start navigating it. 2. Before you add more hours to your current work, ask whether those hours would generate more return in your current gear or in a new gear. An extra 10 hours of overtime at a job that pays $23 an hour after taxes produces maybe $140. 10 hours building a scalable asset in year 1 produces almost nothing, but in year 3 might produce several thousand per month ongoing. The math is not even close once you zoom out. The question is whether you are willing to play on a longer timeline. 3. Pick one form of leverage and engage with it at any scale. It does not have to be dramatic. A small index fund investment set to automatic, a small business side experiment, a content project that might build an audience. One thing. Because zero leverage and any leverage are on different exponential curves, and the compounding difference between those two curves grows every single year you wait. The treadmill will always be there. It will always feel productive. That is what treadmills are designed to do. The question is whether you want to keep running or figure out how to change gears. If you want to keep thinking about this kind of stuff, subscribe. That is the whole pitch.